agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, the place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum Jay Carson. Hey, Jay.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
I am like fireworks going off behind the Washington Monument.
They spelling out Carson in big letters. I don't
Exactly,
know.
yes.
A thrilling sight, absolutely. Well, I don't think there's a Hatch Act violation there, so we should be good to go. Anyway, before we do get started, I want to just thank everyone who's given me feedback on our new series, that 2020 election series I'm doing with the NKU students in a special class I have. And so if you do have any questions or comments, this is, like I said, a brand new thing for us, for me. And so I would love any kind of feedback, especially questions for the students. They're looking forward to that. And again, you know how to get in touch. Just Mike at politicsguys.com. Thanks. And also, I want to thank our newest sustaining supporters, Taylor, Kim, Kimberly, Susan, Michelle, and Josh. And Kim wrote in
a lot
this,
of people.
Yeah, well, we've been off for 3 weeks, so I haven't had a chance to do this. So there you go. It happens. They stack up like cordwood or something. I don't know, but we do appreciate it.
Especially when we're off.
Especially when we're off. Anyway, Kim wrote in to say, I found your podcast a couple months ago now, and I recommend it to anyone who will listen. I don't have to explain to you how toxic our current news and social media can be. So instead, I will thank you for being the change that we both want to see in the world right now.
Wow.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Very cool. And of course, as a Patreon supporter, you don't only get that second full-length episode every week. You also get ad-free versions of anything that has ads in it that we're doing, as well as other things at different levels of support. And of course, if a monthly support pledge is too much of a commitment, there's also PayPal where you can make a one-time pledge of support. And finally, if you would like all of this bonus content, and you can't really afford to support the show right now, not a problem. Send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com. I'll make sure you get access to everything we're putting out. But for everyone else, just go to politicsguys.com/support or patreon.com/politicsguys. Thank you guys so much for that support. All right, G, I guess we're ready to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. So our first story today is we're obviously going to talk about the Republican National Convention, which again was an unconventional convention due to our current situation. It featured Trump, and more Trump, as you might expect, but also featured some addresses by Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, who sort of stepped up and gave the sort of the inclusiveness pitch, I'd call it, as well as the Attorney General of Kentucky, who gave a really sort of a different, I think, take on African Americans who would pitch to support Trump. Also included was Mike Pompeo, with not without some controversy, in that secretaries of state typically do not appear or speak at a national political convention. It also included things like a naturalization ceremony, a pardon of one of the speakers, as well as some regular Americans talking about Trump policies. Now, the controversy related to, of course, Trump's has I guess, a difficulty, and we can talk about this, and I don't want to mess it up in the news part of it, but of sort of separating Trump from the United States government. So many things were broadcast from the White House. The naturalization ceremony was, of course, a government action, and it raised questions regarding the Hatch Act, which prohibits the use of, or prohibits certain federal employees from electioneering, campaigning. So Mike, given all that, and I'll weigh in with my thoughts in a minute, but first, what were your overall impressions of the new type of convention, I guess? And secondly, do you think it's effective? And I'll leave it at that. I'll put in my stuff in a minute.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be good if we talked about the convention, the message of the convention and its effect separately from the Hatch Act issue. And so I'm glad you kind of want to do that. So in terms of what I think in general about the convention, and I didn't get a chance to talk about, the previous week's Democratic convention. As a political scientist, I know that conventions don't really matter all that much in terms of moving voters. They're largely preaching to the choir. And I would expect in our current political environment, they might matter less than ever with so many more people being, solidified one side or the other. There might be a bump here or there, but honestly, I don't really expect this to change things a whole heck of a lot. So that's kind of my political scientist hat. But in terms of the message, I think the message was more or less exactly what I would have expected. Donald Trump played to his strengths, and Donald Trump's great strength, I think, is playing how well he plays to negative emotions like fear, anger, and resentment. I see Donald Trump as a Republican as sort of the anti-Ronald Reagan in that sense. And that's what he does best, and that's what he's natural at. And so the convention was focused around that sort of message. The second thing I guess I would say in terms of message is this was unusual in that typically what incumbent presidents running for re-election do is they focus mainly on touting their record. But that's challenging for Donald Trump because, we're in the middle of a pandemic that a large majority of people in polls say that the federal government has mishandled. The economy's in recession due to the pandemic. And the only really major legislative accomplishment that the president has, that's the 2017 tax cuts. In the most recent polling I could find, that has around 2/3 public disapproval. And so given all that, he kind of has to run his reelection campaign as an insurgent again, make America great again, as the sort of awkward message of Mike Pence has it. So that to me is totally expected. I didn't think it would be anything different than what it was. About the only thing that I guess not really shocked me anymore, I might be beyond being shocked, is the extent to which the president violated, if not the law, and I don't think there were legal violations, but violated norms of campaigning in some of the actions that you mentioned, the pardons, the naturalizations, the campaigning from the White House, that sort of thing. So that's my general take.
So let's take a couple of those, because I on things, let's say the naturalization and setting aside the Hatch Act piece. That would seem to run contrary to the idea of sowing fear and discord, right? I mean, you're a people, and he's welcoming them as citizens and so forth. So, I mean, I guess I push back a little bit on. Certainly, there was a law and order message throughout, which I think you'd expect. I mean, it's kind of not surprising that that's what he's chosen is what he's going to run on. But
you're right, Jay. Let me just jump in and say you're right about that. There certainly were elements of the convention that focused on that sort of thing, and there were elements even of President Trump's unusually long acceptance speech that focused on that sort of thing. Yeah. So yes, I misspoke. I should have said that I saw that as the focus, but not the entirety of it. And so I want to just clarify there. So yes, you're absolutely right about that.
Not always sowing fear. I think other commentators have noted there was actually a bigger outreach to minorities than you've seen in a lot of prior Republican conventions. And one reason for that is I think there's a sense of, look, if Trump can swing the minority vote in just a few places, that might be significant. Now, Republicans are never going to win the black vote. At least not anytime soon. But it's a matter of if a percentage of it moves. Trump actually did better than a lot of other Republicans. Now there's also, I think there's a lot of ways you can look at that, and sort of looks at how the numbers. You can say, well, he did better than any Republican only when Barack Obama wasn't on the ballot, that kind of thing. But nevertheless, it was there, whether it works or not. Now, moving to the other Hatch Act stuff, I would tend to agree with you. I don't think there were Hatch Act violations, but God was it tacky. I guess sort of the my sense of it.
And just to be clear, the Hatch Act, number one, the Hatch Act exempts the president and the vice president in that.
Because the assumption is sort of everything the president does is political.
Yeah. And the Hatch Act says that, to kind of paraphrase, that officials cannot use their official position to influence the election. And so, I mean, when you look at the history and the intent of the Hatch Act, I think that the people who are pushing back against this are absolutely right, saying it's about basically saying, well, you are my subordinate in the department of whatever, and therefore I would strongly encourage you to take time off and go and vote for, or campaign for. That's the sort of thing it was designed to prevent.
It's designed to, on the one hand, protect civil servants from that kind of pressure, and two, protect sort of the electorate from civil servants, being overly partisan. And again, there's certain levels of exemption to different classes of people, because there are some government employees who the law sort of acknowledges their job is political. So but I'll tell you, I certainly wish he'd done stuff that wasn't at the White House. Now, I don't know whether there was a way to do that. I would have to think there was, but I don't know. And I guess the other thing that this strikes me as bothersome from a small R Republican standpoint. And one day we should talk about that, and I should write a book about it or something. But the sense that the Republican Party evolved out of the Whig Party, and the Whig Party evolved out of copying sort of the British Whig Party, which was pushed back against the aggrandizement of particular figures, right? Of the king, of the prime minister. It didn't
fireworks spelling out your name in the sky, sort of thing. Sure,
exactly. Yeah. That would be a very non-Whiggish sort of thing, and the Whigs in America grew out of a response to Andrew Jackson, who was in many ways the first populist ideological predecessor, if you want to call it that, of Donald Trump. So from a small R Republican standpoint, yes, it rankled me that there's the sense that anyone who is in public office, we are merely caretakers, right, of something bigger than ourselves. And it should not be about candidate or the person. Let's put it that way. Certainly we can celebrate a candidate and root for him, and in the convention, that's what it's all about. But mixing those two, I think is bothersome. Now, I wouldn't go so far as there are so many who see this as sort of like a Nuremberg rally or again, the incipient dictatorship. I think it's Trump being Trump and being kind of tacky. It's sort of the same way he puts his name in big gold letters on everything he owns. And it's bothersome. I guess. What are your thoughts on it? I mean, do you see it as more than tacky and bothersome?
No, I
threat to the Republic kind of level.
I don't see it as a threat to the Republic in and of itself, but I see it as just part of another step in the erosion of unwritten rules and norms that I think, and you and I have talked about this before, that in many ways are more important than legal strictures, because what binds society together, what keeps us working together, is respect for those unwritten laws and norms and codes of behavior, and the belief that in politics that there are things that are bigger than ourselves and we are public servants. And that to me is even more so than his policies, most of which, aside from the climate change piece, which is a different story perhaps, but most of which can be reversed. But my larger concern is the potential for lasting damage to these norms of behavior. And that to me is one of the most troubling things about Donald Trump is. I don't think he respects that. I haven't certainly seen gotten any sense of that. And I know I would expect that for you as a true conservative, that would bother you quite a lot too.
Yeah, there's a sense of there's a and I won't try to say it in French because I would screw it up. But the Louis XIV statement of
I am the state.
Yeah, that again that very much rankles. What you would call conservatives or classical liberals. The idea that one person is the state. Again, they are caretakers of something that is bigger, and that's very much the Republican, small R Republican. It used to be, I'd say, capital R Republican tradition. So I guess all that.
Well, one thing I wanted to mention, Jay, is that obviously there was a lot of focus on the law and order message, which makes sense because I think right now it's the strongest issue that Donald Trump has to run on. Now, I think it's important to draw distinctions, and I certainly in favor of parties drawing distinctions. That's what they're supposed to do. When it gets past hyperbole into out and out fabrication, I have a problem with that. And, certainly we heard the claim a number of times that Joe Biden wants to defund the police. And Joe Biden, in fact, has gone on the record saying he actually wants to give more money to the police. And so that bothers me. It also bothers me in the context of when we look at, for instance, the fiscal year 2021 federal budget, which the president proposed in February of this year, not that long ago, actually, which calls for a decrease in federal funding to state and law enforcement of just a little over $400 million. And so Joe Biden is saying that he wants to increase funding to police, and Donald Trump is not just saying, but in a budget proposal has decreased funding to police. And again, I think that's something that will maybe come out in debates.
And they still won't give him any credit.
Yeah. But I
already defunded the police. Come on. No, I think we should also point out, though, that point, the vast majority of police funding is state and local. It's sort of the feds sort of kick in a little bit extra, and there's grants that then go through the state, go through the local, get directed to police departments. But the vast majority of funding is done at the municipal and or state level. So
yeah.
It's a little bit of a red herring when we're talking about the federal level. That said, I think there's the chief executive would set a tone, right?
Sure.
Of whether what support ought to be, and could certainly use the bully pulpit to urge more or less support. The only thing I was going to say, and this is what slipped my mind a second ago, was on the breaking of the norm. And again, as a small R Republican, it troubles me because I don't want to lose that part of the party, because I think it's a huge part, and it's one of those things that it's difficult to put your finger on, but when you see it, and I sort of we saw it there. I can remember being outraged back in the 90s with the Clinton fundraising and the Lincoln bedroom for the same reason. And for those of you too young to remember, it was a matter of there were fundraisers, and basically if you gave the Clinton campaign X amount of money, you could stay in Lincoln's bedroom. And it led to all sorts of shenanigans by celebrities, and sort of a degrading of what most Americans would consider sort of a sacred space. And again, the Trump thing, this is a little less so, but still troubling, and it surrenders that moral high ground that I think Republicans held.
Yeah.
In making those kind of arguments.
The other point I wanted to make, and you mentioned the president's leadership and setting a tone and that sort of thing. And of course, that's something I agree with, is I was disappointed by the lack of social distancing and masking at the public events. Now, the president has sort of changed his tone a little bit on that, but reports that you take a look at the video of, for instance, the president's acceptance speech, people were crammed right together, and there was literally no distancing. There were almost no masks. I think in big group shots, I saw one or two out of over 1,000, was it, or 1,500? I think. There was no rapid testing beforehand. There were no temperature checks. Reportedly, there were no health questions, and that sort of thing sets the tone too. And certainly, the White House could have issued masks to everyone and said, "We would like you to wear these," and that would have sent a message
and the mask
as
could
well.
have said Trump. I mean, that would have been
absolutely, and people would have been happy to wear that, and that would have sent out a message to a lot of folks saying, "Hey, the president takes this seriously," and this would be a thing that would cost almost nothing to do, would send a message, and could potentially help keep people healthy and save lives. And the fact that they chose not to do that, I find that it makes me a little sick, actually.
I'm not, I'll say on the mask issue, it's weird. And I would say, as far as the Republicans who are making masks an issue, pick your battles. I don't think this is the hill you want to die on. But yeah, there are some who sort of reflexively see the not wearing of a mask as sort of a symbol of resistance, if you will, whether that's smart or not. So yeah, no, I would agree with you there that this isn't the hill you want to fight on, and Trump could do better if he had gone the mask route. He might have turned off some folks, but I don't think many.
But I'm not talking about this in terms of politics, Jay. I'm talking about this in terms of actually doing something that costs almost nothing, that could potentially have an effect that would help people in a real way, in a non-political way. And yet he chose to not do that. So that's not about politics. That's about keeping people healthy.
Yeah, there's still this. Well, here's the thing: people are going to wear a mask or they're not going to wear a mask. You and I differ on how much the general populace follows Donald Trump and does what he says or does what he exemplifies. So I tend to have. I think it would have been better if he had, but I don't think there are.
Well, let me put it to you this way.
People out there saying I'm not going to wear a mask because Trump didn't have them.
Let me put it to you this way then, in a hypothetical. Let's say that you're almost entirely right and I'm almost entirely wrong about the influence of the president on masks. So let's say that because of if everyone had been masked, out of the millions of people, 23 point something million people who watched the president's acceptance speech, slightly less than Joe Biden's speech, which may rankle the president. I don't know. But out of those 23 point something million people, let's say that there were just maybe 100 people who said, well, maybe I'll start wearing a mask a little more, seeing that. I mean, wouldn't that be worth it? Wouldn't that be worth it in terms of even if one person was saved from exposure to coronavirus because of that? Wouldn't that be worth it?
I suppose. I guess I have trouble getting over that hurdle of I'm going to do this or not do this because that's what the president.
Right.
Does.
I'm not saying. I'm saying
Donald Trump.
I'm saying even if we minimize President Trump's, I mean, even if there's the potential for one person to not get coronavirus because of that, wouldn't it be worth it?
No, I'm saying This will be an interesting topic just about debating sometime because I naturally shy away from the if just one person argument because I think that's a
if there's no cost. But I mean, if generally speaking, when we're making those arguments, we say, if imposing this burdensome regulation would save just one person.
And
I agree with you there.
You have to destroy the economy, but it might,
But when we look at the cost of masking up every 1,500 people at the president's acceptance speech, those costs are negligible. I don't know what 1,500 masks cost, but it's not a whole heck of a lot, certainly. And so I would argue that this is a different situation, that saving just one person or a couple of people from exposure to coronavirus at that cost, that absolutely is worth it.
Okay. Well, and you would though make the same argument for like the Al Sharpton March in Washington.
Yeah, and one of the first things I did this morning when I woke up is I pulled up the pictures and I looked at. I was curious to see, what sort of
now,
masking
a lot of people are wearing masks,
Yeah,
but
and that's
certainly not distant.
No, right. And, and obviously that's the nature of that. But I would think if you're going to be together for whatever reason, masking is the way to go, just like people didn't, and so yeah, I think masks are very important. And it's a choice the president made. And I think it's a hugely disappointing choice.
Moving on to our next story, obviously the big story, not political, is the riots occurring in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man, by the police. He was shot in the back 7 times. Protest followed, and the protests were quickly followed by riots, which involved a lot of burning of Kenosha, Wisconsin. It also aroused armed counter demonstrators, where they called themselves people going out to defend property, which then, from what we can tell, resulted in the shooting and killing of 3 people and the killing of 2. A young man, 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, was arrested for those shootings. And at this point, Rittenhouse appears to have been one of these people who sort of self-enlisted in this fight. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on this as far as the federal response? Now, I would say the state and local response has been something that would cheer most conservatives. This is not what we saw in, say, Portland and Seattle. In this case, the local and state officials have said, listen, the violence has to stop, the rioting has to stop. This is not the way. If you want to protest peacefully, please do so. But if you're showing up with a gas can or a gun, that's not protesting peacefully. So the mayor of Kenosha and the governor of Wisconsin have done that. The governor of Wisconsin has sent additional National Guard troops to Kenosha and has indicated that he would accept federal help. So where do we go next step from here, Mike?
A couple of things you asked me. I guess in terms of the local response, I'll comment on that first. I certainly wasn't. Obviously, I don't think anyone was cheered by video of Jacob Blake being shot 7 times in the back, and I certainly wasn't cheered by the local response of law enforcement driving around saying, "We appreciate you guys, we really do," and handing out water to young vigilantes with weapons in the streets. Let me finish. While at the same time, on that same video, you can hear other law enforcement in the backgrounds telling protesters to clear the streets. I would think that if you're under a curfew, you would want law enforcement to tell everyone, especially young people with rifles, to get off the streets. And so that's an important part of the response. And I'm incredibly disturbed by that sort of thing.
Let me be clear, because when I said cheered by official responses, I meant the mayor and the governor making statements condemning the violence, not as opposed to in comparison to the mayors of Portland and Seattle. So yeah, I'm not saying that I am cheered by police shootings or anything like that. So.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think you were. I just wanted to I think that's front and center. I mean, there's the response, but there's a reason why we needed a response, because of the initial actions. And I think we need to focus on both of those things, the initial actions, what happened, and then the response. But yeah, I agree with you that, I certainly stand with Joe Biden and, denounce violence and looting and rioting and so forth, while still being, a very strong supporter of people's First Amendment rights to assemble and protest.
So going, to the next issue on that, you had expressed concern, I know, as far as what has Donald Trump done or said, or not done or said about Kenosha. He had tweeted numerous times things about sending in troops the typical sort of Trumpian response. But did not, for example, I don't, at least as far as I can tell, call for calm or express any sort of sympathy with either the victim of the shooting or anyone involved, really. So, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought, I would have expected, even from President Trump, some sort of pro forma statement, even if it's not on his Twitter feed, but on official White House statement of we regret the loss of life, and this is it should be investigated, that sort of thing. But there, as far as I could tell, and I looked a lot, as far as I could tell, there hadn't been anything like that. And to me, that I think is I'm not disappointed. I guess I kind of expected in a way, but that wouldn't happen, I think, is a huge failure of leadership. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I would, I wouldn't go as far as you do. I mean, I think it's one of these. If I'm going to be really cold calculating and Machiavellian, just say, look, this is the easy political layup that you're missing, and that is to issue a statement saying, listen. We understand there's an issue with policing here, and there needs to be an investigation. Two, there was another shooting that may have been brought about, by this sort of civil discord that's roiling our country right now, and everyone needs to step back and calm down and call for peace. That would have been ideal. It did not happen. On the other hand, I think a president should be cautious in terms of weighing in on local law enforcement issues before all the facts are in. So I would agree that saying, look, calling for calm and saying we need a full investigation would have been a way to go. But so and he didn't do that. But also I don't think it's good to for the president to either prejudge any of these people involved until the facts are good. And just to be clear, there is there are numerous local investigations as well as a federal civil rights investigation relating to the initial shooting of Jacob Blake. So the investigations are going forward, and that's why I say maybe it was sort of an easy political layup that he missed of why not just say this is what we're going to do, and I'm for all citizens being treated fairly and by the police, and so forth.
Yeah, we can look at it, and we certainly do look at all these things through the lens of politics. But I think another way to look at this, and a more fundamental way to look at it, is what is the right thing to do? What is the decent thing to do? And the decent thing to do is to express sympathy. I mean, as you pointed out, law enforcement is almost entirely a state and local sort of thing. And so what the president can do is set a tone and that sort of thing. And, he chose, I think, for understandably clear political reasons to not do that. He had a choice of doing the right thing or not doing the right thing, and he chose to not do the right thing. It's a choice we've seen President Trump make time and time again because, well, he is who he is.
Well, I'm not sure. I guess what political advantage would you see? Because again, I just said he missed the easy political layup. What political advantage would you see that he gained by not making that kind of a statement?
Well, I don't think it was a layup at all. I don't think he'd get much of an advantage from issuing some sort of a pro forma statement. Again, I'm not looking at this necessarily through the lens of politics. I'm looking at this through the lens of what would a decent human being do.
You wouldn't be hassling him this morning if he had made it. So,
no, I mean, I'm saying that the first question I'm asking myself isn't a political question. It's what will we expect of a decent, humane leader in this situation? And that's not a political question. That's just a human being. That's just a question of ethics, I guess, or morals. I don't know. I get them confused sometimes. But and so I think he failed that test. And you basically came out with the sort of statement and that he should have said if he were a better person, and he's not a better person. And that's who we have, so there we go. But in terms of the political advantage or disadvantage, I don't really see there being much of there might have been much of a political advantage for him to make that sort of statement, which is why I think he didn't make it, because people would just see it as empty words and, maybe they'd be maybe they'd be right. I would hope that in his heart, the president would have sympathy for Jacob Blake and the victims of Rittenhouse and so forth. I can't see into his heart. I don't know. I hope that's the sort of person he is, but it's based on actions. It's hard to come to that conclusion.
Yeah. Well, I would draw a line in when I say sympathy. I think you would, if I were president, you would need to be careful not to say I express sympathy with either Blake or with the victims of Rittenhouse or with Rittenhouse or anyone, simply because all the facts are not in yet. You run the risk of, there was the Barack Obama situation early in his administration where Professor Lewis Gates was I don't know if he was arrested, accosted by police when he was trying to essentially get into his own house. He had locked himself out. And Obama made the statement sort of, well, the police acted stupidly. And of course he was right. The police did act stupidly. But Obama sort of acted stupidly by jumping into that before all the facts were in. So I my only thing, and this is nothing to do with being a good human being, bad human being, but I think when we talk about expressing sympathy, you can express sympathy in terms of, I understand there is an issue with law enforcement in our country. I understand that proportionally excessive force, at least as the perception is used more against people of color. And we need to look at that and make the appropriate changes, as opposed to saying, my sympathy goes out to Jacob Blake.
Well, and
you see the distinction I'm trying to make, because
I don't. Yeah, and I think, well, for instance, even sticking with the law and order message, certainly the president wouldn't be prejudging by encouraging everyone to stay off the streets.
Exactly. Yeah. I would be 100% with you on that. Yeah.
And so I don't really think it's necessarily about law and order, because certainly I think he sees that as a vehicle. I'm trying to. I think everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt, but when I look at a repeated series of actions, it's sort of hard for me not to come to the conclusion that on this issue, so much of what the president is doing is sort of just incredibly crass and calculated and motivated by nothing other than his desire to maintain power. I know that's not how you feel about these issues, and how many Republicans
but again, I'm
feel.
trying to get at what's that calculation, though, because I don't see the upside.
The calculation is, I think, the standard Trump political calculation of whipping up his base and actually encouraging this sort of thing, hoping for more of this sort of thing, because if people can feel scared enough and feel that Joe Biden is an existential threat to their safety, that, in the words of one of the great lies of the Republican convention, no one will be safe in Joe Biden's America. If he can get enough people to believe that strongly enough, maybe he has a path to re-election. And so he's willing to spin that lie and work up that amount of unfounded fear because of, that crass political calculation.
Okay. I'm still not seeing how it helps, but we will move on to our next story. And this is something you and I went back and forth a couple times on Facebook over last week, is the phenomenon of Republicans for Biden. Most notably, John Kasich, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention. Other high prominent, Republicans, we'd say, would be Christine Todd Whitman, former governor of New Jersey, Meg Whitman, who would have been a presidential candidate, former New York Congresswoman Susan Molinari, and the list goes on. Colin Powell, who I believe that he had appeared at the Obama convention, or at least before. But setting aside, your sense is that this is significant and a big deal. My sense is less so. So let's hear your side first.
Well, I guess, I wanted to ask you as a Republican, there are always, as you've pointed out on Facebook, you can always find instances of somebody from the president's party, the incumbent president's party, who does not support him. And you've mentioned a number of those instances throughout history. But what is unprecedented here is the number of these people in this instance, just the size of this dissent, with over 20 former Republican members of Congress who've announced open support for Biden, over 70 former national security officials, including 2 former CIA directors who were under Republican administrations. And as you said, the list goes on and on. And so I think that the question that all Republicans, all reasonable Republicans, and that's you, should be asking themselves is, why are so many of these people that I respect? Because I know, Jay, that you have a great deal of respect for John Kasich. You mentioned you voted for him in the 2016 primaries. He would have been probably one of your first choices for president. And so why, in terms of, before we get into the effect, I want to ask you as a Republican, why do you think so many of these people, especially a large number of people that you have a great deal of personal respect from, why are they not only declining to endorse the president of their own party, but are actively endorsing the president or the candidate of the other party? Why do you think that is, Jay?
I think we'd have to break it down, because to some extent, all of these people are going to have different reasons. There are some who we can say are probably motivated purely by patriotism, that they do feel that Donald Trump is bad for the country and Joe Biden would be better. There are those who, and I would put Governor Kasich in this basket, to borrow
or binder, whatever. I don't know. Yeah,
basket or binder. I mean, listen. I mean, and you're right. My political evolution, goes back 20 years to John Kasich spoke to my intern class when I started at the State House, and John Kasich was a former State House intern, and I've met Kasich on a number of occasions, heard him speak countless times. He is truly an inspiring speaker, and I think he's a straight shooter. He also, though, has a I guess we'd call it sort of a Trumpian vanity kind of streak. And after the primary, during the primary, he focused to a large extent less on governing the state of Ohio and more of being the anti-Trump Republican, and which he's still done. And I get these emails from his organization blasting Trump just about every other day. And as much as I do admire John Kasich, I really think some of this is it's personal. That he feels he was personally wronged by Donald Trump, and he's going to keep doing. He's going to push back. Now, it's also not at all unusual. In fact, it happens all the time where someone's personal feelings happen to line up with, and this is what's good for the country. In fact, the more I've been around politics, the more I see that. Someone of like, listen, it's not just my personal feelings, but this is absolutely the best thing we need to do. So I'm, to say there's one motivation, I think oversimplifies it. In terms of a lot of the former national security folks, take a look at what Trump has done. He has, this is the establishment, and he has run against the establishment. So to me, it's not, whether you call it the establishment or whether you call it the swamp, it's not surprising that those folks in the national security, the diplomatic establishment, would oppose him.
Right.
And there's a third group of folks. Well, and I'll put some of these national establishment people in there. And I wish Kristen were on here to weigh in on this too, because a lot of folks, after you're out of the diplomatic or national security apparatus, you still have security clearances, and you can make quite a lucrative living for yourself doing various consulting. And I think there are a lot of those folks who listen. If the establishment is out of power, their consulting services are in less demand. So there's that. And again, I'm not saying that people do this purely out of, oh, I'm going to support Biden because there's more money in it. But there is an alignment again of one's personal well-being and what they see as good for the country.
Yeah.
And likewise, there are some other folks in the Republican Party who I think see this, and this is again not. I don't mean to denigrate them to say this, but would like to purge the Trumpian influence from the Republican Party. Again, they're more establishment folks, and would love to see Trump go down in flames, and that opens the door to a restoration of the Republican Party. And I would love to see a restoration of the Republican Party. So I'm not faulting them on that, but I don't think we can just say every Republican or person who served in a Republican administration, it's pure patriotism. And I'm not saying it's not patriotism, but
sure. I mean, in the vast
what I'm saying is there are mixed motives for all of these folks.
Sure.
And if we're being appropriately skeptical of both parties, we should always look at that. Listen, it's politicians act in what they perceive to be their best, their self-interest.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that the vast majority of all Republicans will vote to reelect Donald Trump in that vein. But has all of this, I mean, when you were talking about the establishment, people and views and that sort of thing, it struck me that a lot of what you were saying reminded me of what I take to be your views as a Republican. And so I've got to wonder then, has all of this given you pause, made you at least think about how you're going to be voting, or are you just pretty much, has your mind been inalterably made up?
It has given me pause, and I'll tell you the sort of the funny things, because the stuff that Trump does, that we always get the question, the listener mail question about what could Trump do that would really upset Jay, and it's weird stuff like the demanding that the government get a finder's fee for the TikTok sale. It's bizarre stuff like that it's so completely against the free market ethos that brought me to the Republican Party. It's the tackiness of the fireworks behind the Washington Monument. It's that kind of stuff. It's the and also it's also just the dumb showboating sort of stuff that you blow good political chances to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. So those are all things that trouble me. And John Kasich's speech, you sent me the transcript, and I looked through it, and look, I would agree with a good 95% of what Kasich says.
Yeah.
But the one statement he made where we disagree, is he says that in discussing Joe Biden, he talks about other Republicans, and he says they fear Joe may turn sharp left.
Yep. Yeah,
I don't believe that.
I thought you would pull that one out. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, that's John. That's that's where we differ. I do believe Joe would turn sharp left. And
let me ask you this, Jay, because it seems to me the best way to get a sense of who a person is to look at what they have done throughout their life. And like, for instance, if we take a look at what Donald Trump has done throughout his life, in the public eye and as a business person, his presidency really doesn't come as much of a surprise. There's a clear
This is exactly
continuity.
Exactly as advertised.
And when I look back at Joe Biden's career in public life, which is essentially his adult life, right, because he has a long record, he has been a pretty center-left Democrat, fairly moderate Democrat. In fact, a lot of progressives were very upset about Joe Biden because of his things like voting for the crime bill and taking more conservative sort of stances and the whole Anita Hill thing. And so it seems to me that Joe Biden's 30 plus years in public life and that extensive record, it's hard to look at that and not say this is a pretty mainstream centrist Democrat. And so I think then if we believe that people's past actions are the best sign of what their future actions are going to be, and I think most people would agree with that, the evidence would suggest that Joe Biden, that John Kasich is right, and Joe Biden is who we think he is, and not who Donald Trump and many Republicans are making us want to believe who he is. And so I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, no, and I would say that was sort of the view that I would have had of Joe Biden a year ago. But the other way to look at Biden's career is he was centrist, middle of the road, sort of center left when his party was center left. And now their times have changed, and he has renounced some of those positions. Right? He said, well, he shouldn't have voted for the crime bill, and well, he should have been tougher on Clarence Thomas. So there is a sense that, and he created this document, right? This 100-page policy document, which he says this is what he's running on. Much of it is a Green New Deal, albeit pared back a little bit. But he did this in consultation with AOC, with the far left of his party.
Well, let's be clear. Let me just, before you go, let's be clear. It's not like he is building his agenda based on what the far left wants. Certainly, he is consulting with all parts of the Democratic constituency. But I think it would be misstating facts to say that AOC, who got 60 seconds, 30 seconds, I don't know, some blink of amount of time at the convention, that she and the squad are dictating policy to the Biden campaign.
But she was in charge of his environmental task force, the policy task force that went into putting together his platform.
Yeah, and if you look at that platform and compare it to the Green New Deal, it's not just a pared back Green New Deal. It's a very different sort of plan. It has a lot of things the Green New Deal proponents would just blanch at.
For themselves, it still has pretty ambitious goals of zero carbon emissions by, I want to say, is it 2045?
In 15 years, I think, or something like that. Yeah, and certainly it is.
Which are to me, that's drastic, and that is radical. So that's why Joe Biden gives me pause, because I'd like to believe that and quite honestly, look, if this was, back in the day, like when Bill Clinton was elected the first time, I sort of yawned. I was like, yeah, all right. Bill Clinton elected the second time, yeah. I did not have strong feelings. And look, if this was a Bill Clinton character, if this was even a Michael Dukakis character, if we were in that kind of a moment, to me it would not.
What do you mean by that? I'm curious.
But I think there are big forces out there that are detrimental to our country, and a lot of it is the neo-Marxism, the identity politics that's sort of become the core, right, of the left wing of the Democrat Party. And I'm not sure that he would push back against that. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it could be the Nixon goes to China type thing, but
yeah.
I have not seen that yet.
Well, and I know we're running short. You mentioned the China thing, and that's something I was hoping we'd get to today. But I think what we'll probably do is we can have a more extended conversation of that, because I want to say before we do close that the China issue is one that perhaps gives me the greatest amount of pause, and one that I think perhaps the Trump administration maybe is taking a stance on. Of all the things that I could potentially be in favor of with the Trump administration, there aren't too many, right? It's a very small list.
You're coming around.
The China, that's a pretty big concern. And again, Well, let's talk about that on our midweek show, because I think that's
Sure.
a hugely important issue. And, we also can talk about some other things as well, maybe the House vote on the Postal Service, and also some of my crazy, interesting plans to reform our system. I have some ideas about voting and about making the House much larger that I know Jay just has some very strong.
I don't know. You might be
on.
surprised. You might be surprised by where I
Anyway,
come out on this.
so all of that will be there. If you're a supporter, it'll be there in your midweek feed. And if you're not a supporter, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys and you can become a supporter. Or if you can't afford to, again, just email me, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you all set up. And something that everyone can do that matters a lot to us is subscribing, leaving ratings and reviews, and especially sharing the show on social media. That really is a big deal, and we would appreciate it. And again, if you want to get in touch with us, ask us a question, correct us, or what have you, mail@politicsguys.com. And please do check out our bipartisan politics subreddit, URL you'll find in the show notes. Also, our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page, and we are on Twitter @PoliticsGuys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkerson, and Nathan Sosnowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.